The lesson for this morning is from the 16th chapter of Acts, beginning at the 16th verse, or the 22nd verse. A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure that they did not escape. So the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet into the stocks. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All of the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison's doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. And then he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household." And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. And then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thanks, Barb. Well, on this 4th of July weekend, I wanted to share this with you. Early in the 19th century, so early 1800s, a French statesman by the name of Alexis de Tocqueville, and his picture is on the front of the bulletin today, he made a study of democracy in our country. And as his conclusion, he wrote the following. He said, "I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her fertile fields and boundless forests, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her public school system, in her institutions of learning, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution, and it was not there. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. He concludes by saying, America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. I thought that was pretty insightful. What de Tocqueville saw as our greatness was the goodness of our people. And he saw that that was our most valuable resource. That our good character was what made us great. And so I invite you to take a look at today's lesson. I find this lesson very interesting. And I'd like you to ask yourself this question. And by the way, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is an opinion question. For you, what is the most startling thing in this passage, other than the earthquake? So, earthquake wins, but what stands out? Okay.
Paul and Silas remained.
Okay.
And because of the circumstances, Paul wasn't necessarily making a friend or being a friend like we talk about in our class, but he was evangelizing to the jailer. Probably, I would imagine he'd been talking before this, I would imagine, since the jailer had to be there with them. And God used this time to show the jailer what he needed, and Paul was there to see that conversion.
Yep. I think all the things that you've mentioned are startling in their own way. For me, and it was mentioned by one of you, I think. For me, what's startling is the fact that Paul had the opportunity to escape, and he stayed. I mean, put yourself in Paul's place for a moment. He was doing work for God, and for that, he ends up being severely beaten and thrown into prison. And then in the middle of the night, there is an earthquake. The prison doors open, his chains fall off, and yet Paul doesn't try to escape. He stays. He does what is right. And my question for us is, why is it important that we do what is right? I think a lot of times we might be tempted to do wrong because it seems like it would be to our benefit. I mean, how many of you like paying taxes? All right, you can pay mine. Yeah. Well, that's true. Well, I think today's lesson shows us at least two important reasons why good character, doing what is right, is important, especially for Christians. The first important reason is because people often notice character. In today's lesson, if you take a look, after the jailer noticed all the prison doors open, what did he assume? Yeah, he assumed that all the prisoners had escaped. He assumed that people would do what was in their best interest, whether it was right or wrong. He assumed people would look out for themselves, look out for number one. And I think one thing that startled him so was Paul's character. Paul not only didn't make a run for it, and I'm assuming he had the time since the jailer assumed he had escaped, and he was so convinced of that he was about to take his own life for letting him escape. But not only did Paul not try to escape, but he actually went out of his way to save the life of the jailer. I mean, when the jailer may have been the only one standing in the way of his freedom. And so my question is, do you think the jailer would soon forget Paul's good character? Not a chance. Not a chance. And what's important for us and why this isn't just history is we see the same thing today. How people stand up and take notice of character. One of the better that I've read non-biblical things is the following that I'm going to share with you. And it's written from the perspective of a child. And I think it's probably written basically talking of the mother. But the point applies to a degree to all ages. And that's why I share it with you today. Here's what they write. When you thought I wasn't looking, you hung my first painting on the refrigerator. And I wanted to paint another. When you thought I wasn't looking, you baked a birthday cake just for me. And I knew that little things were special things. When you thought I wasn't looking, you said a prayer. And I believed there was a God that I could always talk to. When you thought I wasn't looking, you kissed me goodnight. And I felt loved. When you thought I wasn't looking, you cared. And I wanted to be everything I could be. When you thought I wasn't looking, I looked. And wanted to say thanks for all those things you did when you thought I wasn't looking. You see, the truth is our characters probably notice more than we even realize. I mean, think about it, man. Don't you notice people's character? No? Yes? I mean, for those of you who are still in the workplace, who gossips at your work? Do you notice? Who will do anything to get ahead? Do you notice? You see, one important reason for doing what is right is that people really do notice and remember character. And it becomes a form of witness of what we really believe. So that's the first important reason that we should do what's right. It is noticed by people, for good or for bad. Good character, bad character. Another important reason to do what is right is that it is our character that is often the first thing that awakens people's interest in Jesus Christ. And I find that very startling in its own way. It's often the first thing that awakens people's interest. In today's lesson, did the jailer show any interest in Jesus prior to Paul's show of good character? No, we don't see any evidence that he cared at all. And why would he? I mean, he just went about his duties locking up a prisoner. And he had probably done that 100 times before. I mean, nothing special. But what about after Paul's show of good character? You see, it was Paul's character, at least to some extent, that made the jailer wonder what made Paul different. And look at the result. Take a look at the last sentence of today's lesson. It says, he brought them into his house and set a meal before them. And he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. I mean, what joy it ended up bringing to that jailer's house, don't you think? And Christ-inspired character has the same effect today. As a quick example, I just want to share with you a true story of a well-known Christian. And you probably know his name. You may even know something about him. But how many of you know the name Lee Strobel? Okay. Yep. Wrote The Case for Christ, The Case for a Creator, The Case for Easter, The Case for Faith. Anything with the words "the case for," he wrote. But what you need to know about Lee Strobel, and that you may, but I want to remind you, is that he was an ardent atheist who worked for the Chicago Tribune as an editor. And I want to share with you because he tells what started him asking about Jesus. And these are his own words. He said, "It wasn't a phone call from an informant that prompted me to re-examine the case for Christ. It was my wife. Leslie stunned me in the autumn of 1979 by announcing that she had become a Christian. And I love his response. I mean, I don't know that I love it, but I can see it. He said, I rolled my eyes and braced for the worst, feeling like the victim of a bait and switch scam. He said, I had married one Leslie, you know, the fun Leslie, the carefree Leslie, the risk-taking Leslie. And now I feared that she was going to turn into some sort of sexually repressed prude. Hey, it's his words. He says, who would trade our upwardly mobile lifestyle for all-night prayer vigils and volunteer work in grimy soup kitchens. He said, instead I was pleasantly surprised, even fascinated, by the fundamental changes in her character, her integrity, and her personal confidence. And eventually I wanted to get to the bottom of what was prompting these subtle but significant shifts in my wife's attitudes. So I launched an all-out investigation into the facts surrounding the case for Christianity. He said, setting aside my self-interest and prejudices as best I could, I read books, interviewed experts, asked questions, analyzed history, explored archaeology, studied literature, and for the first time in my life picked apart the Bible, verse by verse. He said, I plunged into the case with more vigor than with any story I had ever pursued. And he concludes this section in his book as saying this. He says, and over time, the evidence of the world, of history, of science, of philosophy, of psychology, began to point toward the unthinkable. So I want to ask you, what was it that started Lee Strobel, the atheist, down that road to examine the truth about Jesus? Yeah, I can sum it up in just one word: character. Because he saw the change in character of someone he knew. For the jailer in today's lesson, it was partly Paul's character that started him down that road or that path of inquiry. Sirs, what must I do to be saved? For Lee Strobel, it was his wife's new character. And for the people around you, it may be them noticing your good character when you thought they weren't looking. And so the next time you are wondering whether to do what is right or do what is wrong, think of this lesson. See, to me, God put Paul in a position where he could do wrong, to do what was right. And through God's power and Paul's character, a whole household came to know salvation. And that's why taking the hard road to doing what is right is so important. Because character is noticed by people. And because people often first become interested in Jesus Christ after, not before, but after they see that you're somehow different because of Jesus. And I'm just going to end it by saying, and Alexis de Tocqueville also saw that it was good character of the American people that made America great. And so you see, now it's our time. This is our generation. Alexis de Tocqueville is with his Father in heaven. This is our time to help make America great by our good character. So happy 4th of July.